Chastity, welcome to the Leanpub launch video for Assembly Arithmetic Algorithms, the Linux version. I was wondering if you could take a moment to talk to all of us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do, and what this book is about and who it's for.
All right. Yes, I'm a writer and a programmer in Lee Summit, Missouri, and I'm also the author of the DOS edition of Assembly Arithmetic Algorithms. And part of the reason that I chose this title for this series of books is because it's on assembly language and arithmetic, which is the basic math that most of us learn in elementary school, and algorithms, being a certain programmatic way of expressing a certain type of operation. And so I chose those three A words as sort of a triple A sort of a joke. This idea
Right.
that I'm just trying to be an all-encompassing thing here with these books. Um, and the focus of most of my writing is to empower people, to give them freedom, to give them choices they didn't even know they had. And I think one of the features of the Linux edition specifically is this focus on software freedom. This idea that not only do you have more choices as a programmer to install different compilers and interpreters for different programming languages, but you have endless customization opportunity. And when you don't like what one Linux distribution does, you can hop to another, but you can expect that same consistency of the Linux kernel and the system calls, which I teach in the book, because the kernel is the core of an operating system. And Linux gives you an interesting opportunity because you can look at the source of the Linux kernel, which I have done. I'm not smart enough to understand it because people have put in decades of work into it. But the fact that you have the option is amazing in and of itself. And the stability is every system call for a given architecture of the Linux kernel is going to have the numbers, the number of the system call. Every system call has a number, and that number can't change because if the numbers changed of the system calls, then all the software would refuse to run, every single one, because it depends on that consistency, that number. Now, sometimes new numbers are chosen when there's a new architecture, like when we went from 32-bit Intel machines to 64-bit. They decided to change the number of the system calls. And it often makes sense because they will put similar calls, there'll be consecutive numbers. And I like some of the changes I see. And in this book, it mostly focuses on 32-bit Linux system calls and how you can use that to write some interesting and fun programs. But there is an example in chapter 11 where I take the program from chapter 10 and then I convert the entire thing into 64-bit calls instead of 32-bit. See, chapter 10 features the first of four fundamental programs that I'm going to be including in this book. Because the chapters 1 through 9, they introduce concepts, certain functions to allow you to how do you get a string on the screen? How do you get a number on the screen? How do you convert user input into something you can do something with? And then chapter 10 is a calculator. It's a stack-based reverse Polish notation calculator, which I thought was something very educational because not everybody knows this, but just quick history lesson. Hewlett Packard had a series of actual physical calculators, and they used reverse Polish notation or postfix notation. And it was a way of using a calculator that did not require parentheses. So you don't have to remember, oh, parentheses and then
Right.
exponents and then multiplication, division, then addition, subtraction. No, you don't have to remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You don't have to remember these order of operations because in postfix notation, you get to choose the order of the operations based on you put your numbers in, and then you put your operation, your addition or subtraction or whatever, after you've already put numbers onto the stack. And the reason I chose to put that as the first of the programs, even though I have other programs to share, is because assembly language follows the exact same reasoning. The computer does the instructions that you give it in the order you give it. And that is not true necessarily in C or C++. To a certain extent, it mostly is true, but modern high level languages, they don't do one-to-one correspondence. Like you might write put this number in this variable, but then the compiler has to choose, it will choose optimizations, or it might figure, oh, it has to decide, are we going to use a register at this place, or are we going to use a memory location? So the compiler is making all these choices for you and trying to choose order of operations for you. Whereas I feel that a postfix notation calculator and assembly language have the exact same purpose of knowing the exact order, knowing the computer is doing exactly what you told it to do, and no more, no less. And the other thing that's important, and the reason that the Linux version is different than DOS, is because DOS is the way of the past, which is great. I love the past. I'm old fashioned, but Linux is the way of the future, because more and more people are discovering that servers are running on Linux. Most of the internet is running on Linux because of its stability, because computers can run for sometimes years without even a single reboot. So there's that stability, that ability to keep older machines still running. And this has environmental impacts too, because a lot of times if people don't know that they can still keep using their computer for 15 more years, it just ends up in a dump somewhere. And that's a tragedy. And so I'm hoping to teach people more about Linux in this book as an operating system, but also teach them assembly language and some of the new, faster ways you can do things.
And the book is really great at that, and just as kind of direct and clearly formulated. I mean, imagine if Chastity, who can speak in sort of these clearly formulated, coherent kind of paragraphs like this off the cuff. Imagine how clear and coherent the book is. That's how clear the book is. So you already answered, I think, a question, or at least partially answered a question I was going to ask you, where you say in the book Linux is a better environment for programming in any language. But there was another question something I wanted to ask you about. So obviously the theme of control and transparency, like knowing the computer is going to do what you tell it to do, are important in your books and important in what you're doing, important to you. And actually recently we had a guest on with a new Leanpub book on Linux called Jay Lacroix. Have you heard of Jay?
It sounds familiar.
He's got a Linux channel on YouTube called Learn Linux TV with over 1 million subscribers now. So it's like a Learn Linux channel. Anyway, so he wrote a book on switching to Linux basically.
That's so cool.
And it's very cool. But one of the things I got from Jay was a similar, I think, to be presumptuous about both of you, I guess, a kind of similar sensibility about the need for the need for control, but in particular a kind of frustration, particularly with Microsoft.
Yes.
He had this crazy story about how back in the early 2000s, in order to basically get some program to run on his Microsoft computer, a Microsoft program, he had to go to a phone booth and phone them and give them a code. And he's in the rain and it's cold outside, and he's like, what am I doing? And it was, I think that was his sort of conversion moment to this is crazy. And so one thing you say in the book is Microsoft Windows actively, and I get when I read this, I was kind of laughing at myself because I was like, I'm not being a programmer myself, but I know the frustration. You say Microsoft Windows actively sabotages programming by its forced system updates, reboots, and AI advertising forced into every part of the OS. And Jay was talking a little bit, particularly about the ads being forced on you and stuff like that. And I told a story in that interview about how I remember when I got a Mac after switching to Mac after using Windows for a while. This was back in 2008. The first thing it did was it had a chime when I turned it on that I wanted to turn off. And then it showed me an image during the booting process that I wanted to change. And I couldn't turn off the chime and I couldn't change the image. And when I was next in whatever the version of Best Buy or whatever it was, I think it was called Future Shop in Montreal at that time. There was a guy hanging around, like a worker there. And I was like, oh, how can I change these things? And no, this is the reason I tell this story, is to ask for your opinion about this, what I'm about to get to. When I told him I wanted to change turn off the chime and change the image on booting, and he could hear the tone in my voice of frustration, he got mad at me. And he said, why would you want to change it? It's like when you booting up your computer is like when you watch a sitcom like Friends. Don't you want to watch the credits and hear the music that they designed for you? And I was like, wow, we are like, my brother has this line that like there's an infinite number of ways you can divide the world up into two kinds of people. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, my God, like in my world, I paid, not just I paid, this is my machine. This is the machine I'm going to be using. I want to
Yeah.
have control of it. And then this guy thought that was nuts. You should want to be controlled, essentially by other people, and not only that, enjoy it. So anyway, there's my little spiel.
My response to that is I'm
Okay,
going to use a very American and very relatable example that most people will understand. The difference between using Windows and using Linux is that when you are using Windows or Mac, you are watching sports, you're watching football. But when you're using Linux, you're playing it. You
there you
have to
go.
learn the rules. You have to know how to control it. You have to do that. And so that guy who spoke to you, he's so wrong because it's not just watching a movie. If you want to watch a movie, you pull up on any device or even a DVD player or VHS player. You know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
using a computer is all about getting your work done, whatever it
Exactly.
is. You as a writer or a graphic designer or just emailing grandma or whatever you're
Right.
doing, you
Yeah.
you you want to be able to get to your business as quick as possible. And I have experienced my own frustrations. And being a long time Linux user, then when I do use a Windows or a Chromebook I recently bought, and then I find out, no, we're not going to let you download this PDF file. We think it's not secure. Like, are you kidding? I'm
Right.
downloading a PDF document of the documentation of like the new C compiler or some new tools or whatever, or I'm downloading Tiny Core Linux, like an ISO of a Linux distribution that I had planned to run inside an emulator, and Microsoft or Google is like, oh no, we're not going to let you download this file. But just a very quick example, I outsmarted Google Chrome OS
Okay.
because I bought this Chromebook to use for writing and also for playing Words with Friends with my mom because that's her favorite thing to do. And it has a little developer mode. It lets you install a Linux distribution inside a Chromebook. The modern ones do. So you can allocate so many gigabytes of memory and you can install like a Debian distribution inside the Chromebook. So here's the thing, the built-in Chrome web browser would not let me download Tiny Core Linux. It just wouldn't let me do it. It blocked it every time I tried. But the Linux distribution running inside the Chromebook in an emulator had no such restriction. So what do you think I did? I used the Linux wget command. And the wget command is very easy to use. It's like wget space, and then you give it a URL. Any URL, whether it's an HTML file, a PDF file, an ISO file of some operating system, and then it's like it just downloads it. It didn't fight me. It's not, oh, I don't think you should be downloading this. It just literally downloads anything from the internet that you give to it. So basically, I used the developer Linux emulated environment inside a Chromebook to do what the makers of Chromium OS didn't want me to do. They did not want me to download the files I choose. So I outsmarted them using their own system and the Linux emulator in the system.
I couldn't think of a better example to give to someone watching this about why you should read Chastity's books, and particularly this one on assembly arithmetic algorithms, Linux. If you want to learn how to get that kind of control, be able to deal with your frustrations by using the machine yourself, as you say, with that great playing football instead of watching it. these books are really great. The last thing I wanted to ask you about then is what are your future plans for publishing books?
Well, of course, I intend to keep writing programming books. There are also non-programming books that I tend to write sometimes. And I wanted to ask you, I'm sure other authors have this question. Although Leanpub seems to be mostly a place for technical books, it's usually mostly computer books or stuff about artificial intelligence. But what about other genres of books? Like, what about books of, philosophy or stories or something like that? Is Leanpub still an appropriate place for those kinds of books too?
I guess there's two answers to that. One is 100% yes. We'd love to have, we invite books on, I mean, the second last launch video I did was for a novel that a previous, like Leanpub author who is a software engineer, but he likes to write fiction. So he started his first book in a new trilogy. And so we invite fiction, we invite all kinds of genres. We do have lots of business books and stuff like that too. The reason that there isn't so much fiction, there's two kind of reasons which are related. One is Leanpub was really hard to use in the beginning. You have to write in plain text, and you have to know what if you a lot of people they hear plain text markdown and they're like, bye, long gone. The irony being, and this is the kind of thing that I think, kind of philosophically melds, I think, with some of the stuff that you write about too, is like, then they go off and use Microsoft Word, which is 1,000 times more complicated than learning plain text and
Because
markdown.
then you have to remember where the menus are and what the keyboard shortcuts are.
And you can have a sort of like super up-to-date computer and you're going to get a spinning wheel opening up a 10-page document and all that kind of crap. But anyway, Leanpub was Leanpub was built by programmers. It was technical and hard to use. But also Leanpub was made for publishing in progress and stuff like that. The inspiration for it was a book on a programming language that basically was published in a paper format, went out on the bookshelves and was obsolete the next day because someone changed the programming language. So programming books need to be updatable, et cetera. But then what happened was there were a lot of programming books and computer software and technical books on Leanpub. So everybody who goes to Leanpub only sees technical books and they're like, oh, this is a place for technical books. So
but because of the history that programming books need to be updated because things change sometimes. And that's what I love about Leanpub actually, because I like the idea that I can fix something. If I see an error or if one of my readers sees an error or they want something clarified more, that I can improve that, which is, of course, another benefit. And this directly relates to the freedom I was talking about with Linux, is that if you are a Windows or a Mac OS user, tough luck getting the developers to fix bugs.
Right.
But if you're a Linux user, you have two options. Sometimes you can fix the bug yourself and recompile yourself if you know enough programming. Otherwise, you can actually submit bug reports. You can contact people about a find fix, even get the original team of developers, who are usually volunteers anyway, to update it and fix it. And you can actually get things fixed and updated. So it's that same exact reasoning. The foundation upon which Leanpub is built, this idea that you can update things and fix things, is the exact same reason that many people start loving Linux, because they can get things fixed without having to wait till some billionaire tech bro just decides he might update, So that's important. But as to answer your question about future writing plans, besides my programming books, there is this novel I've been working on. Okay. It's been kind of off and on because I've been so busy and because it's kind of emotional. But this story takes place in a fictional town in a town called Podunk, which literally means a town in the middle of nowhere. So there's this guy named Chad who plays soccer in this town called Podunk. And this town has a population of about 200 people. It's kind of like an old-fashioned town. Everybody knows everybody. All the neighbors gossip about each other. Everybody goes to church. And it's just that kind of old-fashioned backwards town. And then there's this guy named Chad, and he's popular. He's attractive. He plays soccer. Everybody loves Chad, and he's rich. And yet at the same time, what's neat about Chad is that he literally lives his life with the question of what would Jesus do? and he tries
Oh.
to be a good Christian,
Hmm.
So he is trying to actually live as Jesus taught, and he actually is following the Bible and all that. But that's not true of everyone else in that town. And so you see the behavior of Chad leading the town by example of how they ought to be. But of course, there's struggles. There's people who get jealous, who try to tear down his reputation. And so that's one of those novels that I work on when the inspiration strikes. I end up writing another chapter. I just did like last week, I wrote chapter 9. And eventually, if I get that, completed, then that could actually be pretty cool because it's meant to have sort of a message about veganism, about environmentalism, and also about Christianity. What would Jesus do, and all these things. And so that is like a complete reversal of my technical books, but that is something that I have been sort of working on. And besides that, even the past books I have, which are not even all on Leanpub, there was a series called Chandler's Honesty. And it was a series of conversations I had with a unicorn in my dreams. It was very interesting. It was kind of emotional, but it goes into my past. It's almost to compare it to a modern example or an old-fashioned example, like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, how these three ghosts visit
Right.
him on Christmas, and they go into his past and his present and his future, and he learns a lot about himself. It's a little bit like that, not quite, but it's a little bit like that because I'm having these conversations with a unicorn named Honesty, and it's named Chandler's Honesty because that was my original name. That's my birth name, is Chandler. And so that's something that I have published on other platforms. And so on the one hand, I do technical books and I enjoy doing that, but I also have books that are more emotional, more spiritual, religious, or philosophical, or something about ethics. So I have a lot of different kinds of books. So I'm glad to know that those other kinds of books are welcome on Leanpub, and maybe you'll even see me get some of my other stuff on there. But the technical foundations and the reasons you explain for why there's more technical books on Leanpub, partly because it used to be hard to use. But man, Markdown is the way. It's the fastest way to get a book written.
100%, 100%. Well, Chastity, thank you so much for sharing about the new book and your passion for Linux and everything like that, and your deep technical knowledge and understanding of it, about your future book writing plans, and in fact, your past book writing as well. Those fiction ideas sound really fantastic to me, and I hope to see more of your books in the future. So thanks very much for being on this launch video
All
today.
right. Thank you, Len. It's been a pleasure.